Hello, friends, and welcome back to the podcast. This is a bonus episode, an end of the week release, because really what week is complete without some words of wisdom from our friend Alexander John Shaia. So Alexander, welcome back, my friend. It's an honor to have this time with you.
Hey, it's great. Do I get to be your first guest now that you're in your 40s?
You are the first. Yes. Welcome
A
me
new
into
decade right here,
yes.
folks.
Welcome me into a new decade. I've heard good things about this decade. Is that true? Is it not true?
My 40s were fabulous, and I wish the same for you.
All right. Well, I will accept.
You're ahead of me because I got my doctorate in my 40s, and you're already a doctor.
There you
Wow.
go. I did that in my 30s. Come on.
Hey.
Get on my level, Alexander.
Right.
Well, it's really good to have you here. And for our listeners, I brought Alexander on the show today because he's getting ready to teach a virtual course, I guess we'll call it, with the Shift Network. And it's starting on Tuesday, February 1st. And as someone who is part of Alexander's team and kind of handles some of the social media stuff, I speak from firsthand knowledge that I think this course is going to change the trajectory of people's lives. And so, Alexander, I wanted to bring you on the show today to talk to us about it. So I figure I'm just going to kick the ball over to you. We'll keep it super laid back if you just want to open up and share with us a little bit about this course.
Well, we all know what the work level to get to this point has been.
It's been just a little.
It's been just a little. You sent me that incredible Jim Carrey gift today that I lost it. I needed to be on the floor laughing, and that did it. This is going to be an important course because it's been quite a while that I've had the chance to directly teach. And it's been so wonderful for the last few years that it's been through the books and it's been through interviews, but I have not had a chance to take people over the whole paradigm shift that this course is giving, not just for the Gospels, but really it's a new lens on Christianity. And I'm excited to have this chance. We already know that people from all over the world are signing up for this class, and it's like, wow, I mean, that's the new technology is to sit here and literally have people from Australia, New Zealand, South America, the United States, Canada, the UK. It's like, wow. Anyway, and the course will be live, but also it will be recorded. But live, there's a chance in every one of the sessions for in the moment Q&A. And I'm really looking forward to having that direct experience with people on the course.
Yeah. And what is the title for the course? It's a little bit long.
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to shorten it down to it's Walk the Mystical 4-Part Journey of Transformation.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be teaching this map that is in and underneath Christianity. It's right at the core of the 4 Gospels. It is what I think early Christianity meant when they said that they were followers of the way. The way wasn't just the beautiful presence of Jesus, but they actually understood that the way had a series of sequential steps in it that you go through over and over and over again in the process of wholeness, or you might even want to say holiness, or being a deeper follower of Jesus the Christ. And this map, and I don't want to reduce this to a therapy session, but I think anyone who's involved in quote unquote the 12 steps knows that there's a map. Well, where did those 12 steps come from? They actually, if you know the origins of that movement, all the people who were the initial founders were Christian, and it came out of their deep Christian spirituality. They recovered something that was part of our early tradition. And I'm adding to that by showing it actually was the thread that led those first of our ancestors to choose 4 texts and to know exactly the sequence to have them in. So that I know many people today are questioning, why did we end up with these 4 texts? And some people are like, was it 10 white guys sitting on the veranda, sipping a gin and trading these things like baseball cards?
Right.
No. I understand the question, really, because I was there.
Yeah.
But then I discovered that early Christianity received from our Hebrew mothers and fathers their understanding that the journey with God had 4 parts to it. And these 4 parts were such a fundamental practice in the Jewish tradition that we assume that it's like, to be a follower of Jesus, we didn't need to redo the map that we already knew. We needed to add in the presence and the teachings and the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus the Christ, but we already had the map.
Yeah.
And what's so exciting and a little bit frustrating for me today is people don't know the map.
Yeah.
And what happens to us when we don't have a map? A lot of what I see today, we get discouraged. We think, are we on the path or off the path? Or we despair and we stop the journey. Or we exhaust ourselves wondering when we're going to get to the destination. The map is not the full part of the practice. We still have to walk it. But boy, is it a help.
Yeah. I think that's there's so much there to unpack, because I know for a lot of our listeners, and certainly for myself, like going to Bible college and seminary, like the Gospels were mainly just 4 biographies about Jesus written by 4 people who are just trying to relay the words and actions of Jesus. And it's like, this one is a little bit different from this one because this guy saw it a little bit different. And this guy remembered it a little bit different. But at the end of the day, we can take them all, we can mash them together to make one story of Jesus. And I think it's so hard to unwrap my mind around that, because unwrap my mind from around that, because that's really all that I was ever told. And when I came across your teachings, it's like, oh, well, wait a minute, there's this whole nother element of what this is. And I think that's the beauty of what you're bringing. So I guess my question would be, like, how did all of this stuff that you're telling us about the Gospels, how did it devolve? It almost really devolve into what we hold today.
Okay, I'll go there. I also want to back up, like, how we got the 4, but the devolve happened in the 6th, 7th century. And we're at the point where the Roman Empire is crumbling. And the Roman Church is the only organization left in Europe that can offer a police force, a hospital, a school, any sense of holding a civilization together. The church became everything. And it's not that that's a bad thing, but also what happens is that the whole educational system of Europe is totally falling apart. There is no education. And at this point, even the priests in the villages and in the churches oftentimes would end up being the person who could just read or write a little. And so what happened at this moment, and I'm making a conjecture here, I think it's an educated conjecture, but what we know happened at this moment was we lost the entirety of the 4 Gospels, that we know. And someone or someones went through the 4 Gospels and pieced together sort of a lifeline of Jesus. And this lifeline became the 52 gospel readings that people heard at church every Sunday, every year. That's all. The common folk and even the priests no longer had the entire four Gospels. They had this beautiful but very simplified story of Jesus. And when you have that, and that really existed in Christianity for almost 800 years, we forgot about the four Gospels. They were locked away in the monasteries. And the monasteries had them, but you and I in our local churches didn't have them. All we had was the simplified story of Jesus. Then along comes Martin Luther and Calvin, and they restored the fullness of the four texts to us. But bless them, they didn't know, and we've only just recently rediscovered that the four Gospels were not just four Gospels, they were put in a very identifiable sequence. And the sequence is not the sequence exactly as we have it in the Bible. And so up until the 7th century, I would say that people looked at the gospel as having four sequential chapters. They understood that these four texts formed a larger story by the sequence that they were placed in. And the first person, I'm going to go back now to how we ended up here, because it's so amazing. The first person who wrote anything about the choice of gospel text is this figure that some of us love and other of us don't, called Bishop Irenaeus from the 2nd century.
Love-hate relationship with him.
Yeah, I must admit that I think he's gotten a really bad rap, but I'm the heretic on that side on this one.
Right.
But Irenaeus said something that I found so profound but so puzzling. He lays out this treatise about the choice of gospel texts, and his first principle is there must be four texts. The first principle is not we're going to gather together all the true stories of Jesus. I don't in any way want to say that the four texts are not true stories of Jesus, but it's like if we were gathering together the true stories of Jesus, there would be more than just these four.
Yeah. It's true.
Because I really believe that a lot of the stories in the other Gospels and in the Gnostic texts, etc., are true stories. Why did he say four? He doesn't even go to the point in naming which four. He states this principle that the gospel, and he says singular, must have four accounts. And then he has this long poetic section where he talks about the four rivers coming out of the Garden of Eden. And he talks about the four compass points and the four winds and the four this and the four that and on and on and on about this number four. But he doesn't tell us what I think is the main thread. And it was only digging and finding this material from the 1990s where we discovered that the great feast of Passover, our Jewish mothers and fathers, during the time of Jesus was nothing like what Passover is today. I mean, I have some very, very, very dear Jewish friends, and they invite me every year to sit with them at the Passover meal, and they do a full Passover. They actually do it on 2 nights, and it's 4 or 5 hours a night, and we have the full script, and we do the script and the singing, and it's beautiful. That was not what was going on in Jesus's time. Here's what we think we know about Passover during the time of Jesus. The family would gather. Most likely the father, the head of the household, would be at the head of the table and was going to lead the family that night in a series of questions. Now, this is during a time, and Glenn, I'm counting on you here to, if I'm giving too much information and people are getting lost, just redirect.
No, you're good. You're good.
All right, but remember, this is the time in Hebrew life where they've taken in a lot of Greek customs.
Mm-hmm.
And one of those Greek customs is, quote unquote, the Socratic method, which is you teach not by like standing up and delivering a lecture, but you teach by leading people through a series of questions. Well, the Passover meal had become like a Socratic moment. And the head of the household that night was going to lead the community through 4 questions that were going to be asked. And to the best of my research, realizing we're looking back 2,000 years, the questioning would be something like this. The head of the household at the beginning of the meal, excuse me a moment.
By the way, folks, you can find that mug on quadrados.com.
Yay!
There you go.
And I have the black handle, and Glenn has the.
I got the green handle.
Yay!
Customize it.
Right. So the 4 paths, 1 journey. All right.
That's right.
Okay. Back to the beginning of the meal, the head of the household is going to say, we know that our ancestors were slaves in Egypt. And we know that Yahweh rose up Moses, to offer our people a path of liberation. That's the historical anchor to the question. But now comes the question. Where tonight in your life do you feel you're locked down like a slave, paralyzed by fear, your heart strangled, not even able to hope, et cetera, et cetera. And then everyone around the table would share, in some ways you might even say, examine their life right now through that question. This is so interesting because we think of Passover as the recitation of a beautiful historical moment, and not in Jesus's time. It's really a historical moment that we're going to make present in our lives right now by recognizing that we're not in Egypt, but there's a place in us right now that's enslaved to some fear, maybe some form of an addiction, or some place we do not feel free. Talk around the table. Then later in the meal, and also in Jesus' time, the meal was very simple. Yes, there was lamb. We're not sure if there was much anything else beside lamb and cups of wine. So later in the meal, the head of the household is going to ask the second question. We know that those of our ancestors who made the choice to go with Moses, out into the wilderness, went to a place where they wandered for 40 years. And many died in that wilderness. Where tonight in your life do you feel that you are wandering and perhaps in a death-like moment? Is it an emotional death? Is it a financial death? Is it a spiritual death? What in this moment is like death for you? And is it perhaps a death of something in you that needs to die? Talk around the table. Now we move much later in the evening and comes the third question. We know that eventually our ancestors, led by Ahran, crossed the Jordan and stood for the first time in the promised land. And they knew the promise was true. Where in your life tonight are you hearing God's voice? And you had that first whisper that the promise is true. Talk, talk, talk around the table. Now, before I do the fourth question, what I'm loving about this is the way that the story was told was not first you're a slave, then you go to the wilderness, then you hear the promise. No, it's all happening together in the same moment. There's a part of you right now that's locked in slavery, and there's a part of you right now that's hearing the whisper that the promise is true. So then at the end of the evening would come the fourth and final question. And we know that with this question, the head of the household will take the last cup of wine. And we also know that this last cup of wine was called the cup of Elijah. And that we believe that this is the cup that Jesus took. This is the moment very late in the meal when Jesus takes this cup and pronounces the quote unquote new covenant. But at the end of the Passover meal, with this final cup of wine, the head of the household is going to say, we know that our ancestors, having arrived on the land of promise, took 200 years to make that promise part of their everyday, ordinary reality. As we leave Passover tonight, what actions are you committing yourself to for yourself, for your family, for your community, for your nation, for the world? What actions are you committing yourself to for this year ahead so that next year we might be in Jerusalem, which is their image of paradise?
Yeah.
So the Hebrew world understood as a fundament of their tradition these four questions, and that they were asked in a sequence, and that the questions form a map for our journey with God over and over and over and over again. Our life is always cycling through these four questions with God.
Then these four questions coincide with the four Gospels. And
right, but there's a whole sequence of things that Christianity does in four before. The last thing was to choose the four gospel texts.
Sure.
But this fourness starts within 10 years of Jesus's resurrection. So, yes, and the last thing is Irenaeus saying we've got to have four texts that form the gospel. And we've got to have these texts in the sequence of the map. And so they somehow discerned, and I think rightly, not because they were looking at the archaeology of Jesus's life, and I don't mean to dismiss them, but there's a credible way that you can determine something is true a few hundred years later when you don't have archaeology. And that is, they knew that the Gospel of Matthew has the question of how do you start, or how do you start over? How do you begin again? With that question of, in some place in my life, I'm locked down, I'm paralyzed, I'm in fear. And this text has the teachings, but also the grace to unlock us and to help us start on a new journey. So they placed Matthew as the text of, in my language, how you face change.
Yeah.
Uh, and it, and the text is incredible in that it gives us the internal stuff that we're all dealing with when we're looking at a change moment. But it also keeps reminding us that do not try to walk through this by your own ego.
Yeah.
Walk through it by the grace of something greater.
Yeah.
All right. So we know that the second place on the journey with God is the wilderness, which is likened to a death.
Mm-hmm.
They discerned the Gospel of Mark was going to be this text. Mark is really the text of how we walk through the valley of the shadow of death by the power of the resurrection. I like to remind all of us that these four texts were composed to a community of baptized believers. They were not conceived of for initial evangelization. They were conceived of by communities that were stuck. They were facing a dilemma, and they were asking of God, show us how to move forward, just like we are.
Yeah.
So the third text they knew needed to be a text of standing on God's new promise, standing on the sense of freshness, greater love, more beauty, deeper sense of relationship and justice. And for that, they determined that it would be the Gospel of John, which is the gospel, much like the eagle, that John's gospel soars to the heavens and gives us that great overview of everything, and then brings us back to earth and says, the greatest glory is found in the simplest act today. Finally, they knew that the fourth text of the gospel needed to be something about, like for the Hebrews, that 200 years of having arrived at the promise, now making it part of their everyday reality. Yeah. And for that, they discerned that the last of the text of the gospel would be Luke Acts. And it would be a text that would show us how to mature in creating the promise as something that would serve not ourselves alone, but everyone. Yeah. So anyway, let me just sort of pause at that moment. I'm going to take a sip and let you ask me a new question.
Yeah. So I think if I could connect the dots for our listeners, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we had these four questions that were asked at the Passover meal throughout the course of the evening. And these four questions kind of hit the center of these four different paths or movements. And Irenaeus was aware of this. He was obviously one of the early church fathers. He was aware of these four questions that took place. And so he had a hand helping choose these four texts that magnified the core of these four questions. And that is what we're saying is the four path journey of transformation. Do I have that? Is that a good synopsis of what we spoke about?
It is. I mean, Irenaeus was writing in 180.
Yeah.
His people were being horribly massacred by the Roman Empire. Mm-hmm. And he wanted to give his people what he thought is the best text for their prayer as they face this mini Holocaust.
Yeah.
But he doesn't really end up naming exactly the four. His premise is four. Yeah. And what I find so odd is it's very rare when a Christian will say something and there's not a pushback. Mm-hmm. It was like when he said four, it was sort of like he was naming what everybody already believed.
Yeah. It's like, of course.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a good point that you brought up earlier too, that nowhere does he say we need to pick, the four biographies, or nowhere does he say we have to pick the four, we have to pick all the truths of, Jesus, all the different true stories or whatever, but like that's not anywhere found, but yet that's how so many of us have come to understand the gospel. So I think that this is a really, really, really important thing. So I guess, sorry, my daughter's
So,
playing Uno upstairs, and
oh
she's
gosh,
she's
bring her down.
victorious. She's victorious. So
She's
that's what you hear.
victorious?
I
All
think
right.
so.
All
I think
right.
so. But so I guess that
That's a
then
good
with
omen.
yeah, so with that background kind of in mind for the course, um, what do you envision people taking away from this course? So they go through this course. It's 7 weeks, right? 7 weeks,
Well, it's 7 sessions.
7 sessions in
There's
6 weeks.
actually 1 week where we have 2 sessions. But also people get the recording, so you
Yeah,
don't have to take the course live.
right.
And I got to tell you, getting the recordings and all the handouts and everything that you're going to get is worth the price of the course. And you can take it whenever you have time in your life to take it.
And go back and listen to it again and
Yes,
again and
yes,
again to take
yes.
some
The,
notes.
the recordings are not going away.
Right, right, right. So somebody takes this course. What is your vision for what they're going to take away from this course? Like, why should I invest my time and my finances in this course? Like, what is it going to do for me, and how is it going to help me impact the world and the lives around me?
So I'm going to go back to a piece that I sort of started with, and I really think when we have a map,
Yep.
especially in the painful days that we're in right now, there's a place on this journey, the second path, that text that we call Mark, utterly chaotic, utterly a sense of up is down and down is up, and I don't know which way to go, and how the hell are we ever going to get out of this place? And I wish I had better news except to say that that's actually part of the journey, is going into that place with God. Don't go into that place alone. Go into that place with God, and God is going to lead you through that step by step to some new life that you could never imagine. And one of my messages to all of us on the planet right now, you think this is the end? Let me tell you, the map says this is the beginning. And when you know the map and you know how true it is in your own life, you can see out to the life on the planet right now. There's so much death all around us. But this is not the death of ending.
Yeah.
This is the pain of new birth.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I want people, first of all, to come through this course with more hope.
Yeah.
And then for some of us, I'm hoping that hope is also becoming kind of an anchor in a rest and a knowing.
Yeah.
Secondly, I want you to be able to say, as people now, we've got this sort of language, and I hope it's not becoming a in-house clubhouse type of language where people say, oh, that's a Mark experience, meaning that's a second path experience you're in right now, or oh no, you're having a John moment. You're having one of those brilliant, radiant third path experiences where your heart just bursts open and suddenly life is all chocolate and roses, and et cetera, et cetera. But to know this journey is to be given back the treasure of our ancestors, who wanted us to know, especially in these painful, chaotic times, this is not how it ends. This is how it begins.
Yeah. I've been following your work for, I think I met you at Wild Goose in 2017. I think it was 2017. And I encountered you through Rob Bell's podcast about maybe a year before that. And so I picked up your, book and everything. And I could say for me, I think your work has really helped me like you said, understand that path, understand this journey. So understand the different paths in the journey, be able to identify where I'm at. It feels sometimes like there's a lot of time in Matthew and Mark, which is kind of the entrance into the change, then the storm, all that kind of stuff. But to have that hope, like you said, that this is not the end of the story. There's more paths to go in the journey. But it's helped me to appreciate, I think, more so the joys of my life, but also to, I think, allow the difficult times to deepen who I am, to deepen my faith, and to deepen my ability to see things in the storm that I didn't see before. Because before it was just all about getting through the storm and getting to the end of the storm, but not really appreciating what that storm is in so many ways doing to me on the inside. I think that reading the Gospels through these different lenses while I'm in these different seasons has been so helpful for me and so eye-opening for me. And it's done so much for my faith. And so I can't encourage our listeners enough, coming from someone who has really tried to dig into this work and had really tried to unwrap my mind from around the things that used to be wrapped around, to see things differently. It's a game changer. So 100%.
So can I add one more piece? I would feel people, I think it's a missing link.
Alexander, you can add whatever you'd like. You are
Well,
Alexander John Shaia.
it was like, did you just pull these questions out of thin air for the Gospels? And it's like, oh no. Looking at what we now think we know, always with a bit of humility, and you're never totally sure when you're looking at 2,000 years ago. What's going on in the community of Antioch when the Gospel of Matthew is composed? What's going on in the community of Rome when the Gospel of Mark is composed? What's going on in the community in Ephesus when the Gospel of John is composed, etc.? The questions in these texts are anchored because each one of the four communities was in an utter dilemma. Yeah. And they were literally praying, Jesus, show us how to go forward. Mm-hmm. And the evangelist, the author, whoever it was, led by the Spirit, I totally believe, composed a story that looks like the life of Jesus, and it's got the life of Jesus in it, but it's told in a very particular way because it wants to not tell the story of Jesus. It wants to tell the story of Jesus around this question. For instance, and I'm just going to give you one gospel as an example. For instance, the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew was written to the Jewish Christian community in Antioch in the days right after the destruction of the temple and the massacre of the Jewish priesthood and the destruction of the city of Jerusalem. Many Jews felt this was the apocalypse, and they felt that without the priests and without the temple, they had no access to God. And the Gospel of Matthew is, you think this moment is an end moment. This moment is a beginning moment. Yeah. And it begins step by step through the stories to raise up how we feel and think. We feel annihilated. We feel despair. We're standing with the ash of the temple on us. We're standing with these feelings that yesterday was so golden, and oh, if we could just go back. And we're standing with these feelings like, did I do something to bring this on? Yeah. What if, coulda, shoulda? Or we're standing with this feeling like, look, this is all so big, I'm just going to go enjoy myself today and forget everything else. Mm-hmm. All of that's in the text, and it's all so usual human. Yeah. But what's also in this text is there is a reality that can take away that paralyzing fear, can take away that sense that all of this is too big to handle, and that can help us move towards a future that we can't quite see yet. Yeah. And it is, it's just amazing to see when you understand the stories that Matthew gives us.
Yeah.
How this story that we all know because it's going on in our own lives is happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're all Joseph, who's tried to be a good enough person, an honorable enough person, and this calamity falls him that he discovers his to-be wife is pregnant, which in those days meant he must divorce her, because to not divorce her would bring shame on his parents. And his first obligation as a Jewish son was never to bring shame on his family. He's caught in the dilemma of hearing God say to him, there's a wider world I want you to live.
Yeah.
And feeling that yesterday is saying to him, you have no authority to take this step for yourself.
Yeah.
In some ways, that's almost how all of our spiritual journeys begin.
Yeah. What you think is the end is the beginning. I like that. Yeah, it's so good. Alexander, we are just about, I could talk to you all day. I have so many more questions. But the good news is that you have this course. It's going to be 7 sessions, so there's plenty, plenty more that people can pick up from. But do you want to say any last moment invitation to our listeners to sign up, coming right from the heart of the teacher himself?
Well, I mean, literally out of the 7 sessions, the first session is getting ready for it, and the last session is a wrap up. But all the rest of the sessions in between will be looking at one gospel, and we'll be opening it up as a life question that's going on in our lives right now. And we'll be looking at texts and characters in that gospel that help us answer the practice. How do we face this moment?
Yeah.
So if you would love to discover an entirely new way to experience the Gospels, and I can truly say that until, for some blessed reason, I started teaching this when it came to me 25 years ago, the last time this information about the Gospels was taught was the 7th century. We have not heard this in 1400 years. And I believe it's come back to us today because we need it.
Yep.
Join me.
Yeah. I will be there. I'll put the links for people in the show notes. If you are interested in signing up for the course, the link will be in the show notes to the Shift Network, where you can go there and you can sign up. So, hi, Alexander. This has been incredible. Thank you so much for your work, and thank you. You've made a profound impact on my life, and I can't thank you enough. So thanks for taking the time to drop by here and share it with us.
Glenn, it's my honor. And I'm doing this because of your little girl upstairs and my great nephew and my great niece. I want tomorrow to be so much more radiant than today.
Yeah, and you are doing that, my friend.
Thanks.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Oh.